Good evening. Thanks to all of you for joining us on relatively short notice. We're here tonight, obviously, because of an article that appeared in Deadspin earlier today, and to address the subject matter of that article. My focus here tonight is to talk to you about what the university knew, when we knew it, and what decisions we made based on that information. Much of what drove that process and those decisions relates in part to a fundamental view of the importance of student privacy. And that will likely play a role tonight also, because at the end of the day, this is Manti's story to tell. And we believe he should have the right to tell it, which he is going to do. And so there may be some questions this evening which I defer to him, but I will try and be as responsive as I possibly can to all of your questions. While we still don't know all of the dimensions of this, and other than the perpetrators, I can assure you that no one knows all of the dimensions of this, there are certain things that I feel confident we do know. The first is that this was a very elaborate, very sophisticated hoax, perpetrated for reasons we can't fully understand, but had a certain cruelty at its core, based on the exchanges that we were able to see between some of the people who perpetrated it. Manti was the victim of that hoax. Manti is the victim of that hoax, and he will carry that with him for a while. In many ways, Manti was the perfect mark, because he is a guy who is so willing to believe in others and so ready to help, that as this hoax played out in a way that called upon those tendencies of Manti and roped him more and more into the trap, he was not a person who would have a second thought about offering his assistance and help and engaging fully. Finally, and reflective of that, I want to stress, as someone who has probably been as engaged in this as anyone in the past couple of weeks, that nothing about what I have learned has shaken my faith in Manti Te'o one iota. The same great young man, great student, and great athlete that we have been so proud to have be a member of our family is the same guy tonight, unchanged in any way except for, as he indicated in the statement his released, the embarrassment associated with having been a victim in this case. On the morning of December 26th, very early morning, Manti called his coaches to inform them that while he was in attendance at the ESPN Awards show in Orlando, he received a phone call from a number he recognized as having been that he associated with Lene Kekua. And when he answered it, it was a person whose voice sounded like the same voice he had talked to, who told him that she was in fact not dead. Manti was very unnerved by that, as you might imagine. I will let him again talk about that and his reaction to it. But he maintained that secret vis-a-vis the members of the football family until he called the coaches on the morning of the 26th. They promptly reached out to me to inform me of this shocking piece of news, and I arranged to meet Manti upon his return to campus, and did so on the afternoon of the 27th. I met with Manti for about an hour and 45 minutes and asked him to review every detail of the relationship as he knew it with this woman. Manti did so, was forthright, answered every question, and was eager to share the information with me. I met with him again the next day, as I had put the notes together from the previous day's meeting to just review again what we had gone over to make sure I had all the details correct. And again, he was a full and excellent partner in making sure that the information I collected was accurate. I then took that information and shared it with other leaders in the university for a deliberation as to next steps, what we should do. Some additional questions of Manti were then developed, to which he again promptly responded. And a decision was made to engage an independent investigative firm to see if they could determine what was at the nature of what increasingly appeared to us to be a sophisticated hoax. While apprised by that investigative firm of their work along the way, we received a final report from them on January 4th. I met with Brian and Ottilia Teau in Miami on the 5th to share with them the essence of those findings. We left that meeting with an understanding that they would think about what they had heard, engage Manti's future representation, which would be determined later in the week, in consultation as to how best respond, and keep the university fully informed of their intentions, and work in concert with us when they were ready to communicate the story. It was my understanding, is my understanding, that they were on a timetable to release the story themselves next week when today's story broke. With that, I welcome the opportunity to take any questions.
Jack, over to your right.
Yeah.
It said in the release that authorities are investigating. Are there any, aside from the group you mentioned, anyone else investigating this to see if any criminal action was done here?
I can't tell you what Manti's representatives have done in that regard. I know they intended to pursue his rights fully. As it relates to the university, our lone engagement or referral was to the private firm to do the report for us.
And can you you talked a little about what you talked about. Can you say what you've seen or what the investigators saw that would, some people are gonna, obviously who don't know the whole story are going to question whether Manti was behind the hoax. Yep. What have you seen that would prove that it could not be the truth?
Well, there are several things. One is I would refer all of you, if you're not already familiar with it, with both the documentary called Catfish, the MTV show, which is a derivative of that documentary, and the sort of associated things you'll find online and otherwise about catfish or catfishing. It is a scam, probably revealing my television watching habits, but was covered by Dr. Phil extensively recently, that follows the exact arc of this. And it's perpetrated with shocking frequency for me, shocking as an older guy who's not as versed in the online world, and it is just as this one, an initial casual engagement, a developing relationship online, traffic accident, illness, and then a death. And, you know, as hard as it is for me to get my arms around this, there's apparently some sport in doing this and being able to do it successfully. So that was one, that we sort of found this external guidebook, if you will, or platform for doing this. Two were the internal consistencies, right? As we probed, asked questions, wanted to make sure it all lined up with what we knew independently, the facts as we understood them. We're very comfortable with the consistency and how it all fit together. Thirdly, our investigators, through their work, were able to discover online chatter among the perpetrators that was sort of the ultimate proof of this, the joy they were taking, the sort of casualness with which among themselves they were referring to what they had accomplished and what they had done.
There was some reports when early in the year when this was going on that Manti and Kekua had met and spent time together in Hawaii. Did he explain how those came to be?
He did. And again, I'm gonna let Manti tell the story because he deserves that right. But I will tell you, this was exclusively an online relationship.
Do you know yet when and where he might be available to tell that, when he plans to come out and tell that story?
I don't. I'm under the impression that sometime tomorrow he will be, but I'm sorry, I don't know the details of that.
And then last one, did anybody at the school or with the football team, after Kekua's supposed death, try to reach out to her family and extend condolences in any way as from the university? Not from the university. The Te'au family and Manti himself did. I'm not aware. Now, someone in the football program may have, but I'm not aware of. I did not, and I'm not aware of anyone else that did. But again, given the elaborateness of this, there was a place to send flowers, and you know that was there was no detail of the hoax left undone in that sense. Thanks.
Jack, over here to your right. By your discussions with Manti, when then did they meet? How long had this been going on?
Eric, I don't remember the exact length of time, but it began with an online reaching out to him that he responded to.
I guess the reason I asked is, you know, Brian Te'au had mentioned an in-person meeting to me and several in-person meetings that this had been all the way back to 2009. Does your timeline go back that far, and how do you explain, again, the differences in that story with what you're characterizing as a purely online situation?
I think the timetable does line up, Eric. I don't have my notes in front of me, but I think that's right. And you know, I think as Manti tells his story, you'll see the same thing I saw, that it does fully line up. I will forecast it only in two ways. One is when I first talked to Manti on the 27th about this, and we went through it, and I asked him to take me to the beginning. He began by saying, "We met on," and I said, "What do you mean you met on?" It was an online meeting. He used the verb "we met," and he was referring to an online meeting. You know, he responded to an online inquiry. That was the first time he met her. And as part of the hoax, several meetings were set up where Lene never showed, including some in Hawaii.
And did he talk about a brother that was involved in the hoax, a supposed brother that was involved in the hoax?
There are a remarkable number of characters involved. We don't know how many people they represent. There are male and female characters, brothers, cousins, mother, and we don't know if it's two people playing multiple characters or multiple people. But again, it goes to the sophistication of this, that there are all these sort of independent pieces that reinforce elements of the story all the way through. Somebody else calling, brother, cousin, etc.
And the tip-off in his mind was the phone call, the one that came from her number, what was her number before. That was when he became suspicious, not before that.
Well, more than suspicious. I mean, he became startled, shocked, and yes, that's right. That was absolutely the first time. And again, it goes to my comments about Manti and his character, but every single thing about this until that day in the first week of December was real to Manti. There was no suspicion that it wasn't, no belief that it might not be. And so the pain was real, the grief was real, the affection was real. And that's the nature of this sad, cruel game.
Was there, after hearing the story and knowing that somebody might, in our business, might find out about it, did you encourage him to say, hey, look, we probably should be the ones to tell this story first?
No. And I'm glad you asked that, because I'd like to touch on a couple of elements of it. There was a very vigorous discussion internally about what we do. You know, what is my obligation at this point? And it was governed by a few things. One is, we didn't know a lot. And so until the investigators had done their work, I didn't know whether we were talking about a girl who faked her death, a girl who didn't exist. We just didn't have any of that information. We had no idea as to motive, and that was really significant to us. You know, we're in a unique business here. Was there somebody trying to create an NCAA violation at the core of this? Was there somebody trying to impact the outcome of football games by manipulating the emotions of a key player? Was there an extortion request coming? And you know, when you match the sort of lack of detail we still lacked until we got some help investigating it, with the risk involved in some of these possible scenarios, it was clear to me that until we knew more, we had to just continue to work to try and gather the facts. Secondly, and importantly, and I referenced it before, this is not different for us, notwithstanding that it played out in a very public way. This is not different for us than the circumstances that impact a lot of our students in a host of ways. And we believe very strongly in maintaining their right to confidentiality as students at this university. So from the outset, we established a parameter that this was Manti's story to tell. We wanted to know it would be told. We wanted to know at the appropriate time when it would be told, but that it was his to tell.
Jack,
Go ahead.
not to belabor the point, but just so that I'm clear, is it your understanding then that Manti and this woman have never physically met face to face?
Correct.
Okay. Given your knowledge of the law, what sort of crimes have been committed here, would you say, or can you say?
I am not allowed to practice law anymore. So I will avoid a legal interpretation of this. Let me say in response to that, though, that question had the potential to be central to how you manage this once it surfaced. Because a clear case of illegality would have been extortion. And one very legitimate response, I think, that the Teaus might have opted for here was to let this play out and see if that came when he signed a contract or, you know, had some resources. They opted not to do that, but those were the sorts of things that impacted the thinking relative to timing and how you deal with this story. You know, as to on its face, I'll let somebody else who's still practicing law interpret as to whether anything that's been done to date constitutes criminal conduct. I haven't pursued that question.
Has there been a way for you guys, for you and the people you've been dealing with, to just comprehend what this is all about? I mean, it's bizarre.
Well, as the parent of 4 children, it's been a really frightening experience. You know, for people my age, this is unfathomable. I mean, versions of this in different forms we would understand, but the sort of online, social media, virtual nature of this is hard for us, hard for me, I should speak for myself, to get my arms around. We know, for example, that these perpetrators didn't limit themselves to Manti as a target. And so my first reaction, frankly, was as a father. You know, the way in which young people, our students, our student athletes, my children, are at risk in this environment to things like this because you just don't know who you're dealing with.
Jack, you said this is an online relationship, and yet Manti has talked about speaking with a person he thought was an A. Did a person, in effect, take her position and talk to Manti as if she were his girlfriend?
Yeah, and thanks for correcting that. I mean, online and telephonic. There were lengthy, long telephone conversations. There was sleeping with the phone on, connected to each other. So all of those things. You know, the issue of who it is, who's playing what role, what's real and what's not here is a more complex question than I can get into.
Yeah. One more. You mentioned the perpetrators. Manti wasn't the only one he targeted. With other people at Notre Dame or other bigger scheme, or?
I'm not aware of anyone else at Notre Dame.
Okay. And the Deadspin report said that Manti had a relationship with who they thought the perpetrator was, whether it was a cousin or a family friend. Is that true, and do you know if that played into the motive at all?
That characterization does not square with my information, but I'll let the Tejas address it.
Okay. And then last one for me. The day of the national championship game, when you guys had knowledge of this, there was a pregame special on a news morning show about his story. Did you guys know they were planning on doing that? Did you do anything to try to talk them out of that, or how did you handle that situation?
Where did it air? On?
I think it was a CBS morning show.
I'm not familiar with it.
Okay.
So I guess the quick answer is, since I didn't know it, we didn't. We were very conscious of the fact that we didn't know what we didn't know. And so, you know, we recognize the challenges of that. If Manti got a question in a media session, you know, about that, how do you respond to that? We recognize the challenge of that, and we weighed those difficulties against on the other hand, these other issues that affected timing. I'll say one thing. When the investigation concluded, you know, when we got the first report from the investigators, the one thing we were certain of was that this was coming out. There was too much online chatter about it. There was not an intention, a belief, anything that this would be a story that didn't get told. It was clear it would. We had hoped the first person to tell it would be Manti, and again, the expectation was that was going to happen next week, and he didn't get that opportunity without someone else having told the story, but he'll at least have an opportunity to talk about it in the future.
Did he explain at all why he waited the 2.5, 3 weeks to tell the coaches after he had the suspicions or got that phone call?
He wanted to talk to his parents, and he wanted to talk to them in person. He went home for Christmas break, and that's Manti. That's, you know, that's the son he is. He wanted to have that conversation with his parents face to face. He wanted to consult with them. He wanted to get their advice, and it was on the basis of that conversation, after having concluded it, that he called us. Yeah.
Jack, did Manti receive any other communication following the incident at the ESPN Awards show from the people saying they were Lene?
Yes, they continued to be persistent. It wasn't a single contact.
And when did that stop?
I'm sorry, I don't know exactly when. It dissipated in time, in part because he wasn't responding, but I don't know exactly when it stopped.
And the last question for me, does the Teo family or Notre Dame intend to publish any part of the reports or findings in the future?
We do not.
Jack,
Yeah.
you mentioned the parties being persistent with Manti. I mean, did you get some more insight into what their motives were, and what did you discover through that continued contact?
Well, they were, everything here had a story. It was, there was another story to explain what had happened and to restart the relationship. And I'm not going to go into the details of that. Manti can, but the next phase of the hoax was played out. Here's why we did what we did, and now here we are back, still in character.
So, to be clear, when they tried to restart the relationship after Lene admitted that she, in fact, not died.
Yes.
When you talked about the online chatter that your investigators discovered, what did you discover about the motive at that point? Is it, you mentioned sport, was that it? Was there any other motive that came to light?
Well, all that comes through it is a sort of casual cruelty. They're enjoying the joke. It's sort of these shockingly casual comments about what they were doing and how they were doing it.
And in your investigation internally, did you find that Lene had contact with any other members of the team? Did you speak to the members of the team about, what they recalled about those conversations, or was it strictly you only talked to Manti?
Manti.
Just make sure I understand correctly. He was at a lot of award shows. There was one in Orlando at the ESPN one that you're referring to, right?
Yes.
Okay. The investigators, these Notre Dame investigators, FBI,
No.
who are the investigators?
No, they're
that you're
private. They're independent, private investigators who had a special expertise in this sort of thing, who had experience sort of tracking online activity. And so, while I'm not going to identify the company, that's who it was, a national company, independent.
Jack, just to clarify, did the team know at any point until, do players just finding out now, today, like everyone else?
Yes. I mean, the two coaches knew. I knew. And Manti had taken a couple of teammates into his confidence.
Are you able to tell us which coaches he talked to?
Diaco and Kelly. For those of you who don't follow us, that's the defensive coordinator and the head coach.
The perpetrator, or the female voice that you said, that they would sleep with the phone up to their ear or whatnot, do we know where she is? And I'm assuming investigators have had to make contact. Is an apology forthcoming in the future? Will we ever hear from her, the one that provided the voice?
I don't know the answers to that. I mean, you wind up with with online footprints in this case, and at that point we didn't. Once we were satisfied, we understood the dimensions of this. We shared the information with the Teos and left to them and the people they'll be working with to decide what next steps to take.
And just lastly, what's the university's response to say, the 20-some-year-old fans that have experience with this, that say if you've actually never met her in person, it seems slightly deceiving on his part to bring such attention to it?
Then you don't know Manti, is my answer. Manti lives his life on his sleeve. I mean, he is out there. And as I said earlier, and I don't think this was an accident, they understood, given the nature, pretty extraordinary nature of this man, the more trouble she was in, car accident, diagnosis of leukemia, failing health, the more engaged he would become, the more focused he would become, and the more dedicated he would become. And that's exactly what happened here. And, you know, for those who are suspicious that that can happen in sort of a virtual environment, I think there are a lot of examples out there that suggest otherwise. I mean, this documentary chronicles one of them. But as we've gotten into this, I've been surprised to learn the frequency with which it exists and the cautionary tale it affords to those same young people. You know, the people who will be least skeptical of this are the people who live their life with social media as an important component of it. Skepticism probably increases with age because it's harder for those of us who aren't fully engaged in that medium to sort of understand how it can be used to this effect.
Jack, what did you guys advise Manti to say had he gotten a question directly after about Lene? I know he got one question, but it was kind of within the context of another question. He was able to avoid it. But what did you guys advise him?
You know, we encouraged him to try and focus forward and focus on the game and not draw attention backwards if he could. And so it was that simple. It wasn't very, very complex. Again, we understood the challenge of that, but we were weighing those competing interests in a way that we felt was the right balance.
And sorry, one more. And do you think this affected his play that night?
You know, I don't want to say that. I will only tell you that starting with my interaction on the 27th and continuing today, it's impacted Manti as a person significantly. And there's a lot of tragedy here. There's a lot of sorrow here. But the thing I am most sad about, is, sorry. That the single most trusting human being I've ever met will never be able to trust in the same way again in his life. That's an incredible tragedy.
Just one for you, Jack, up and to the right. You've said several people a few times. Do you have a ballpark of just how many people?
We don't, because we have no idea of all the characters here, how many were one person playing multiple roles. We don't have any way to know that right now.
Is there anybody on the telephone that has a question or two? Then we'll wrap this up.
If you'd like to ask a question over the phone, please press star 1. We have a question from Chuck Goody from ABC in Chicago.
Yes, sir. Chuck Gowdy in Chicago. Did Notre Dame notify any law enforcement agency or the enforcement arm of the NCAA?
No, there's no factual predicate for an NCAA violation that we could find. That, of course, was one of our important foci early on. And no, we did not refer this to criminal authorities. We shared, as I said, all of our information with the Teaus, who in turn shared it with their representatives to pursue it further.
Well, considering at the very least somebody was harassing a star player for the university, and potentially there could have been an extortion component to this. You said you didn't know it at the beginning of it. Why didn't Notre Dame contact law enforcement?
Well, because we believe that was the victim's decision to make. And Manti was the victim here. And he and his family, in consultation with whomever they choose to consult with, had that decision to make. We were not the victim. We've been impacted, but I don't want to confuse this at all. Manti Te'o was the victim of this this scam.
Was there a discussion about contacting law enforcement?
Yes, there was a discussion of anything, any response that might be appropriate.
Do you still think that was the right decision
I
based
do.
on what's happened to this point?
I do.
Thank you.
Yep.
We have a question from Gary Snyder from The Gary Snyder Show.
Hi, Jack. Sorry to have this press conference tonight, but at any point during any investigation, was there anything uncovered where there may be at some point any extortion or money asked from Manti or the university?
Nothing in our investigation revealed an ask which had been made. We were sensitive to the fact that one might be forthcoming in the future, and that's one of the things that impacted considerations of how to proceed.
Thank you.
And our last question comes from Greg Couch from foxsports.com. Sorry.
Hi, I have two questions, actually. One, I wish I could cite it, but I know that there have been reports that Manti said he had an initial face-to-face meeting with his girlfriend at Stanford at some point. What's going on with that?
Well, again, I'll let Manti provide the details, but as I said earlier in this press conference, when Manti took me through the entire story from start to finish, when he first described the contact, he used the verb met. For him, the fact that they connected online, that they met online, was consistent with using that verb. It's, not one I might have chosen, but it was for him. And the timing was, and the timing was consistent with the playing of that game.
Okay. The other one is, given that Manti thought there was an actual girlfriend and that she had died, and then someone called and said that it was her, I'm still having a hard time reconciling why you wouldn't have gone to authorities when there was a possible death, or there had to be some confusion as to what was going on at that point.
There was lots of confusion. There didn't appear to be a death. The evidence was a little bit to the contrary. We asked the questions of people involved in the consideration of what the best steps were. Was there apparent criminal activity here? And at that point, it was hard to identify any. A cruel hoax, but unfortunately, cruel hoaxes don't necessarily accelerate to criminal activity.